copying and pasting stuff that you could just get online and saying you don't even need to buy her book because she got lazy and she didn't write anything new. Everything in here is what you can get online. That's not quite correct, though I did do some copying and pasting of some of the stuff that I have online. What makes the book unique is my insights and the behind the scenes stuff. When I first started working on this, Jesus told me that I'm most creative when I'm writing new stuff, and that's what happened with this book. What I did is I did some copying, pasting, and I went really fast through the first draft. And then when I got into the rewrites and started making my insights into the transcripts that I had of conversations between me and my men, that's where I got really creative and brilliant. And that's what makes this book a good read, because of my insights. And basically they're not correct, because the first 4 chapters are in Brent Spiner's point of view, where I go into Brent Spiner's heart and soul. And the first 4 chapters in this book are written like a novel, where I have conversation between characters, and it reads like a scene out of a movie. And then I have a chapter called Catherine the Great and King David. I have a whole chapter in here devoted to the story of my ancestors and how I ended up with the Catherine the Great and King David genes, in spite of the fact that I am not directly descended from Catherine the Great. And it's a very interesting story. It's how the story of my ancestors and how I ended up with these incredible genes. It's fascinating. The Japanese history is really interesting, but so I got a whole chapter devoted to that. I put a lot of research into that too. That's like the culmination of at least 10 years of research there in that one chapter alone. Then we go into Brent Spiner's point of view for about, I'd say my point of view for 2 chapters. So in the Brent's Forbidden Ground section, it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 chapters. The first 4 chapters is written like a novel from Brent Spiner's viewpoint, going into his heart and soul and how he felt when he was raped by Laurie McBride and when he was in love with me. And it's written like a novel. I really did try to make this book like reading a movie on the page. The one chapter in there is like a parenthesis where I go into the history of my ancestors. Then you have 2 chapters in my point of view written like a novel. Now this stuff is kind of rehashed from my website, but I put some new stuff in there from new stuff that I've learned since I put the stuff on my website. So there's some brilliant insights into here that I discovered even as I was working on the book, which you're not going to get just by going to my website. And then I have the Brent Spiner returns, and then I end the Brent Spiner section back into Brent Spiner's point of view, bringing him up to the modern times, to 2011. Then I have a section in Vladimir Putin's point of view called Vladimir and Catherine the Great. And in this section, I start off with the cursed submarine disaster, explaining how that was an attack on Russia by led by the Jesuit-led American submarine. It almost started World War III. And I have a whole chapter based on research and also what Vladimir's told me in conversations with him. And also I went into how the Jesuits were able to use the cursed submarine disaster to intimidate Vladimir to get Ludmila as his wife. So I have one whole chapter that talks about what really happened with the curse. Now, the official story is that it was an accident, but it was actually an act of war where the United States attacked Russia. And I talk about it in here, and how the President Clinton and Putin smoothed it over, and there's a whole chapter on that. And that chapter needs to be written because that explains why Vladimir Putin became the president that he did and why he played the Ludmila game. He was intimidated. Then we have, and actually I was part of that story too, and that's some brilliant insight that you're only going to get in my book. Like, did you were part of the cursed submarine to that? Yes. And from what I understand, I've been reading about some of my Russian fans, and they tell me that Vladimir Putin has made this book a Russian treasure, national treasure, and he's going to make it required reading for all school children in Russia. I'm really honored, Vladimir. Yeah, one of my Russian fans was telling me this at the bottom of, you know, they comment. I believe that that is true. Saying, oh, they're just trolls making this stuff up. No, I think Vladimir's doing that. He already told me he was translating the book into Russian. Looks like he's already done it. So he's got a Russian version out there, and he's going to have all the Russian school children read it so that they can have an accurate portrayal of recent Russian history, like the cursed submarine disaster. You may say, well, if an American torpedoed the Kursk, why didn't we have World War III? My book explains why we didn't have World War III. And part of it was because Vladimir was in love with me, and he didn't want to lose his ability to view me through the bugs in my apartment, and this book goes into that. The fact that he was in love with me may have spared us from having war with Russia in it was 2000. Anyways, I got a whole chapter on that. Then we talk about how he got Ludmila and how the marriage list came to be. And most of this is written in novel, like you're reading a movie on the page. Then I have a lot of the book on the Quebec trial, because the Quebec trial was such an important trial. This was the first trial in history where the Jesuits got so much catastrophic exposure. They've done such a brilliant job of covering up their war crimes. It wasn't until the Quebec trial that their war crimes were exposed before the whole world in a legal setting. And then this book's going to make it even worse for them. So the Quebec trial is very important. Now, it's true, what I did is I listened to the recordings that Judge Terence Jenkins has up at his YouTube channel, and then I had some brilliant insights. You might say, well, I could just go listen to the recordings at Judge Terence Jenkins' YouTube channel. Yes, you can, but what you won't get in the recordings is what both sides were thinking when they made their statements, and that I've got in here. I can tell you why Laurie McBride said what she did, what she was trying to accomplish, why I said what I did, and the brilliant insights that I'm bringing. The behind-the-scenes stuff is fascinating. And I even show you the behind-the-scenes stuff, what happened during the shootout afterwards when, anyways, it's all in here. This is not, I do have some sections towards the end where I did some copy and paste, but it's very minimal. Most of this book reads like a novel. I have dialogue everywhere, characters talking to each other, and conflict from beginning to end, which explains why in my next book I've decided to make Rule 13 and Zach Knight very main characters. And I'm actually following Jesus Christ's advice on doing this. You know, Jesus Christ met with me and he said, Gail, I've noticed in your last book, which he says that he loves. I said, which part do you like the best, Jesus? He says, I can't say, Gail, because I liked all of it. He said, I loved your book. In fact, when Jesus first told me about this book, he told Terence Jenkins, he says, yes, he said the book that she's working on now is my favorite book of all the books that Gail has written. And Terence said, what? She's still working on it, Jesus. She's not finished. And Jesus says, you forget, Terence, that I see the future as if it already happened. And this book, he's talking about this Forbidden Abyss. He says of all the books that I've written, this is his favorite. And he really, what happened, let me tell you what happened. When I started working on this book, Laurie McBride was livid, and she took me and Brent to court for defamation. She said, what you are saying in that book is not true about me. Her case was that she and Brent had a happy relationship, and that I came in and interfered, and that I intimidated Brent into a relationship with me, and that I was feeding him lies that he was using in the courtroom against her, and that he was intimidated and stating my lies. And Brent says, Spiner, that's outrageous. It's the other way around. Laurie McBride was the intimidator, which they had to use this book as evidence in the courtroom, so Brent couldn't talk to me. He said your book was so on-spot accurate. I was able to use it in the courtroom against Laurie McBride, and he won his case, by the way. Apparently they got the death penalty on her. Now you got to understand, even if we execute some of these Laurie McBride clones, Jesuits had so many clones of her, that we probably won't get them all, and she's still going to be roaming around somewhere. But the point is, she took us to trial, claiming this book was defamation. Brent won his case and actually got the death penalty on her because of the truths of what's in here. This book was used in the courtroom as evidence. And Brent said it was so brilliant, it was so accurate, so right on correct about everything that he couldn't talk to me lest it appear like he was influencing what I was writing, and it would have, you know, sabotaged it as evidence in the courtroom. So for the next book, Jesus told me, he said, Gail, he said, for part one, you copied and pasted. And he said, I guess that's okay for this part one, because for most of it I didn't. But he said, for your next book, he said, you must not do that. Because why would people want to buy your book and just read something that they could get at your website? He said, he has really encouraged me to approach the next book like a novel. You know, and if those of you who are writers, you'll probably understand this, but the most boring book in the world is when all your characters are happy and everything's going great. Well, after the Quebec trial, Brent Spiner found Jesus Christ. And pretty much, in spite of all the challenges we had Jesus on our side, so we always knew we were going to come out on top in the end. So I thought, how in the world am I going to start part two? When you write a novel, you got to have conflict. You got to have a character who has a problem, whose goals are being thwarted, and you know he can't reach his goals. Now that's sort of true with me and Brent, because the Jesuits attacked us and they did the Nukaki and all that. But for the most part, everybody knew Jesus was on our side, and knowing Jesus is on your side, you know you're going to be the victor. So I said, you know what? You know who needs to be the main character in this next book? The Jesuit leaders, Zach Knight and Rule 13. You might say, Zach Knight, he's so evil. We don't want to read about him. This is what is amazing. You know, Jesus was talking to me, and he said that, Zach Knight actually cried when he heard this, Jesus said that Zach Knight cried in the Thornbirds. I'm going to show you in the next book why he did. You see, in my next book, my Meggie, those of you who are familiar with the Thornbirds, you'll get this. My Meggie's going to be Rule 13, and my Ralph de Bricassar character is going to be Zach Knight. You might say, Zach Knight? Ralph de Bricassar has got more class than Zach Knight. Zach Knight has a side of him that he doesn't want anybody to know about, and that's the side I will be exploring in my next book. You say, well, how do you know about this side? Because Jesus told me he has this side. You know, I complained to Jesus once. I said, oh, Jesus, I don't like suffering. He says, Gail, you're not the only one who suffered. Some of those Jesuits are suffering. He says, did you know that they're actually questioning whether Satan is right to make it so that they can't love? Yeah, in the Jesuit order, if you're not allowed to love, that's considered a violation of your worship of Satan. I'm going to be exploring all of this. And I actually made a music video that's kind of got the Japanese theme that I want to bring from Rule 13 into this next book, and I invite you to listen to it. I'll have the link for it right underneath this video. I'm excited about this next book. I'm going to try to pattern it somewhat after the novel Shogun by James Clavell. I've ordered that book. I'm going to read it and try to have a novel of the same style for part two. Really excited about this. On Jesus's advice, he said, Gail, he said, don't copy and paste. He said, write it like a novel. He said, that's when you are great. So that's what it's going to be like, folks. And I appreciate you Russian people. I am going to have loving scenes in there. You say, well, we don't want to read about Zach Knight in Rule 13. Well, you're going to be hearing my story and my men's story kind of filtered through their viewpoint, which will make it much more interesting. I'm going to say something about Rule 13. She's kind of like a misfit in the Jesuit order. She doesn't really belong there, which is why she's so miserable right now. And I'm going to be exploring that. And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean that as a compliment for Rule 13. So I am going to be exploring the love between Zach Knight and Rule 13. Zach Knight doesn't want to admit it. But Jesus told me he's capable of truly loving and being committed to Rule 13. And I'm